All right, so here we go with the demo for the challenge portion of our piece of cake project. I've already started by outlining this here. And when I'm done, I'll show you the video that I took of how I drew this, how this came to be. You'll see some lines that are really light down here, as well as some lines that are a little bit darker. I was pretty purposeful about which ones were light and which ones were dark, because I wanted emphasis in certain parts, like this here. I wanted that to stand out just a little bit more. Same thing goes with some of these that are up here. So already I've got the cast shadow. This is the shadow on the ground. I chose to not put it on a plate. I'm gonna put it on the ground instead. I am not going to be masking anything out with this. If you want to mask something, it will stay white. Then you take the masking tape off and then you can paint in that space, or you can leave it white. And that's a bonus. If you want to try that, you can. So let's see, I'll do that. Move this over just a little bit. So my paint palette over here has dried paint. Nothing in here is wet yet. So I'm gonna start by hydrating the color, and I'm gonna do, let's see, this bluish purple for my shadow on the ground. I'm gonna start with the shadow. And this is a wash brush I'm using. So it's pretty watered down. You can see that it's pretty clear. This is not a straight blue. It's blue that's already been mixed with a little bit of purple and a little bit of orange. That's why it's not a bright blue. It's toned down just a little bit. And this is what I'm gonna use for the shadow. Shadows, the direction of shadows are always gonna be sideways. So any line that you have in here is gonna go sideways. So you see how light that is? It's barely visible, it's barely there. This is gonna end up being a wet on wet. While this is wet, I'm gonna mix in some other color. I'm gonna take a darker version because shadows are darker towards the base and lighter as you move away from the object. So I've got some violet here. And while this is wet, I'm gonna add in a little bit just along the bottom of my pieces. That right there, that dot was left there because there was a lot in my brush. I can use a dry brush and just kind of scoop it up. Okay, can fluff the edges by just grabbing some water and putting water along the edges. Get out of there, there we go. And that will kind of blend the two together a little bit. So I can move it around, and now I'm kind of doing some detail work here. Okay. Watercolor, I love because it is a blend between precision and wildness. And what I'm doing right now is kind of more the precision part, with the small brush and thinking about where along the edges I want to put it. I'm controlling the amount of water that's in my brush, so I can be very, very specific about that. The cake, let's see, let's actually do a mint layer. Just because that's what I have here. This green has been mixed with some other colors, so it's not a straight green. I am gonna ask that you guys use a palette like this so that you can mix colors, so none of your colors come straight from the colors that are provided. You'll collect it and then put it into something like this. I'm pretending that this comes from like the actual thing here. So you'll grab some and then put it down here and blend it with water and blend it with a few other colors as well. All right, so let's do a green layer. I think I want that one to be in the middle. So there's quite a bit in my brush right now. And I'm gonna leave some of those dots around. Remember I talked about texture? This is a great way to add some texture. As it dries, it'll change a little bit, but now there's some texture in there. Prepping another color. It's like a dirtier version of a green. I think will be this one. And I'm leaving a little bit of white space in between. See that? Just a little bit. I'm gonna end up doing a wet on dry over here. I'm gonna let this dry and I'll add more to this. But that's just a little bit of kind of a base layer right there. Again, with a little bit of that white because I don't want my colors to blend in. As I'm looking at this, I'm realizing here needs to be a little bit darker, closer to that drip. So I'm just gonna grab my small brush and add a little bit more around the side. While I've got that brush, I can add a little bit of darkness on the side. We talked about some cast shadows on the object itself. So I'll add some of those on the bottom. I'm kind of wild with my texture right here. This is part of like the wild fun parts. That's a drip that'll have a little shadow underneath it too. Now here, what happened is that I got my green too close to this and it was wet, and so it like bled into it. I can do that on purpose in a few places. All I have to do is, with a wet brush, connect them, and it'll kind of move on its own, given a little bit of time. Just add some more water, get it wet again, it'll start to blend out, blend through. Whenever you mix colors, you want to use this brush for it. And then you can grab details with these smaller brushes here. Gonna do some orange icing, I think. Orange and green look really nice together, so I'm gonna grab some of that. Shade? I want some cast shadows on the object itself. So some shadows like what I did right here and on the side in those two spots, and then a shadow on the ground. So I want you to attempt it. It doesn't have to look great, but I want you to at least attempt it. All right, so for the icing, using my big brush as much as I can. I want to make sure to not get that in with the green, otherwise it's going to be real messy. You guys noticing that my brush technique is like little teeny tiny marks next to each other? Grab a detail brush to add some details. See how I touched it and it just like moved around? That's because that's the wet on wet technique. I'm just making it a little bit darker on the bottom. You guys are so quiet. It's awesome. Did you sign it? Okay. blueberry time. I don't want it to touch the other color. And I want to leave some of the white behind. You'll notice I'm not filling all of it in because I need some of the whites to remain there. Some of the mistakes that is pretty common with watercolor is to fill the entire paper with color and to not leave any of the white paper behind. So another technique that's kind of fun to do is to do some like fine details with some thicker paint, like what I'm doing right up there. Let it dry and then go over it with some thin, with a watered down paint. You see what happened right there? If you make a mistake, dry brush, like just soaks it up. So dry, clean brush. Here we go. I gotta wait for that to dry before I clean up more because it just brought more of that green in because it's all wet up there. See, I can wipe it away, but then it's probably just gonna come back because it's all wet. So this like little detail work that I'm doing right now is something that I'd like for you guys to try, right? You don't have to do it everywhere. It doesn't have to look amazing, but give it a try. Last one is some red for the strawberry. I don't have any red, so. Okay. Now for this, I'm gonna do it right here so you can see, because I want to get some cool texture. I've loaded this, and I'm gonna take this off to the side and dab it until I start to see the texture showing up in the way that I want. Like, there we go. That's now what I want. This was not, there was too much paint on it, but I dabbed the paint off until it's right there. And now, look at that, texture. Some fun ways to get some texture there. All right. So, this is not dry, and I can tell because I touched it and it's a little cold still. If I were to paint on this, I would not get the crisp edges like what I got right up here when I had thick paint that was on completely dry paper. I do want to have some of that show up down here, so I'm gonna wait a little bit and then I'll do more. I also want to wait for these to dry before I fill in this top one with that same color there.